Welcome to Engaging Older Readers with Comics and Manga, presented by Library Pass and Comics Plus. My name is Guido Charles Gonzalez. I'm the Chief Contents Officer of Library Pass and the moderator for today's session. Excited to be joined by some of our publisher partners to spotlight some of their recommended titles for older readers. Chloe Ramos is the Book Market and Library Sales Manager at Image Comics, where they provide resources to librarians and educators looking to utilize comics in their institutions, not only as items to be acquired, but also as keys to facilitate increased patron engagement. Morgana Santilli is the Sales and Marketing Coordinator at Yen Press. She's a former comic shop manager and buyer and always particularly loved helping readers find their new favorite series. Other than reading manga, Morgana enjoys drinking lots of tea, snuggling with her two black cats, and collecting too many books for her toddler's personal library. Ari Yarwood is the managing editor at Silver Sprocket, a San Francisco-based publisher, gallery, and retail shop championing socially conscious and independently produced comic books, graphic novels, and related arts. Today's webinar is presented by Library Pass. We curate high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries and schools expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to thousands of digital comics, graphic novels, and manga in collections curated for elementary, middle school, and high school readers. And we also offer a complete collection, including thousands of additional titles for older readers to public and academic libraries. You can learn more and sign up for a free demo account at comicsplusapp.com. So thank you guys for attending. Welcome to our panelists. And before we get started with the title recommendations, I want to get to know each of you a little bit. So starting with Chloe, tell us a little bit about how you got into comics. What was your early experiences with comics?
Thanks, Guy. I have been reading comics probably my whole life, controversially, starting with Garfield, probably, if we can count Garfield. Yeah, I've always really loved art, the visual arts, and I love reading, and comics are a very perfect melding of those two things. So yeah, been there since the beginning, hashtag Garfield for life.
I was more of a Heathcliff guy, but I appreciated Garfield. All right, Ari, tell us a little bit about you.
I was also going to mention Garfield. Yeah, I think Garfield was like my first comic. I read all of the editions that they had at my public library. And then I, graduated to things like Sandman and other comics that are a little older when I was a teenager. But yeah, I've always loved comics, and I worked as an editor at Oni Press for about 6 years, and I've been working at Silver Sprocket for the last about 2. So yeah.
2 votes for Garfield. All right, Morgana, no pressure.
I also like Garfield. I don't know. I did read a lot of like newspaper comics as a kid. I really loved them. But also my dad was a comics collector. He did a lot of Marvel, a lot of and Neil Gaiman, a lot of Sandman. So I kind of, I don't know, grew up around comics. My first manga was Sailor Moon when I was 8, so kind of I was doomed. I worked at Comicopia in Boston. I was the manga manager and then eventually the general manager and manga buyer there for about 4 years. And I've been with Yen Press since October 2020. So I think I'm stuck in this industry now. And it's great. And I love it.
All right. Well, I think it's appropriate that a webinar where we're focusing on comics for older readers, everybody name-checked newspaper comics as kind of their entry. Younger readers, I actually started subscribing to my newspaper again about 6 months ago and was surprised that newspaper comics are still a very robust thing. And very recently, minus Dilbert. So RIP, good riddance. All right, so let's, what we're going to do in today's session is we're going to have each of our panelists talk a little bit about some of their selections from each of their publishers' catalogs. All of these titles are available on Comics Plus, but they've also very helpfully put together title lists with ISBN information. So if you want to add these titles to your physical collection as well, you'll be able to access that information both via the link I'm going to post in the chat while they're talking, and we'll make that available at librarypass.com.
I don't think enough people really talk about the Garfield to Sandman pipeline, and I'm glad that we're exposing it now. So yeah, I'm Chloe Ramos. I'm the book market and library sales manager here at Image Comics. For those of you who might not be familiar, Image Comics was started over 30 years ago by a collective of authors and artists who were working at the big two and didn't feel like the industry itself was very friendly to the creators who were the backbone of its success. So they left and founded their own publishing company, and here we are today. A lot of what I'll be talking about today will span across different age ratings. All of our ratings are always clearly indicated on every book, and you can sort of think of our ratings as being fairly similar to what you'll find in film and video games. But as with film and video games, a rating shouldn't be there to limit who can enjoy a title. It's only there to tell you what kind of content you can expect. Ranging from, YA and middle grade all the way to adult. Anyone can get something out of a title meant for younger readers, and younger readers often will get something out of a title that is intended for older readers. But we want you, as you're doing collection development and shelving, to know what exactly you can expect in the pages. How many F-bombs, for example, how much violence, et cetera, but not necessarily how much literary enjoyment you can get out of something. The first group of titles I'll be spotlighting all take place in the Massiveverse, which is a new shared superhero universe that has multiple titles which span across multiple subgenres. So you'll see that they're all superhero titles, but then you'll see things like titles that tackle gentrification, titles that tackle, being young and in love and queer, titles that tackle being in your mid 30s and restarting your career and what it feels like to move back in with your parents, but also get superpowers. So I think it's a perfect way to start highlighting how a title can be sort of subversive, subvert your expectations of it. So starting off, we have Radiant Black. It was the first title in the Massiveverse, and it sort of introduces the entire series to readers. It's from writer Kyle Higgins and artist Marcelo Costa. And as I was just mentioning, it stars Nathan Burnett, who has just turned 30, and things are not going super great for him. He is moving back in with his parents. His dreams have not really turned out the way he thought they would. He's at a real low point in his life. I think that we have all been in places in our lives where we have to sort of restart or rethink things, and you can probably remember how uncomfortable that can be. Especially for an adult. But right as things are really not looking super great for Nathan, and he's really wondering about where his life is going to go, he is visited by a cosmic being who gives him this power called a radiant. He is then embroiled in sort of an interspace battle that he has no way to have prepared for, much like adult life. Radiant Black is really great in that it's just you can read it as just a fun superhero story. There's beat 'em ups and there are powers and, there's really cool splash pages, but you can also read it as reinventing yourself through really unexpected means. This title is rated T+, which would mean that it is for ages 16 and up, but adult readers have really responded to it as well. You can think about it like Power Rangers and Ultraman, but with a little bit of like a late quarter life crisis. Moving on, we have Radiant Red, another title in the Massiveverse. This one is from Cherish Chen, Miquel Muerto, and David Lafuente. This one expands the universe through the exploits of Satomi Sone and her alter ego, Radiant Red. She is one of the main antagonists in Radiant Black, and here we get to sort of explore where she's coming from. Satomi is an interesting choice for a superhero comic in that she is an adult middle school teacher who also has an alter ego that is a bank robber. Her exploits are a little bit more complicated than they may seem at first, and I don't want to spoil anything, but we really get to look a lot at her private life, where she's coming from, why she does the things that she does, and how she feels about these things when she's finished. So she commits a crime and then she has to go back to her regular life, which I think is not something that we explore often enough when we're talking about these sort of superhero antagonists. They're not all the Joker, you know, that some of these people are living lives just trying to keep themselves solvent. In Satomi's case, she is married to someone who has a terrible addiction and she's just trying to keep a roof over their heads. Unfortunately, that brings her into contact with a local gang, and she is forced to do some things that even she is uncomfortable with. So this first volume is her sort of fighting back against that and really trying to decide what her powers should be used for and what she's comfortable using them for. You can sort of think about this like a Power Rangers meets Ocean's 11 sort of story. Moving on and moving south, we have Rogue Sun from Ryan Parrott and Abel. Rogue Sun is a supernatural murder mystery. So rather than being just a straight superhero title, you really have that element of, you know, whodunit, which I think is very, very intriguing. I love a good mystery. It takes place in New Orleans and follows protagonist Dylan Siegel. He is a young man who has spent his entire life really despising his father. Not everybody gets along with their parents. There's nothing weird about that. But Dylan's father happens to have been New Orleans' most beloved superhero, and he has just been murdered. Dylan unexpectedly has inherited his father's mantle and his powers, and now he's being thrust into a life that he doesn't even want, to solve the murder of a man he never loved. I find this title really interesting, not just because I love a mystery and that's sort of my thing, but because I like how it talks about the legacy that our parents leave us with and the way that we have to deal with expectations, not just as a child, but all of our lives. There are expectations that are put on us from outside, from inside, what we want for ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with family. So I find this title really, really interesting. Again, this is another one that's rated T+, so 16 and up. And fans of Invincible and Batman and Agatha Christie will really like it. And adults will really like it as well. Our final title in the Massive Verse is The Dead Lucky, and I think this one is probably my favorite because it takes place in the Bay Area, and it's just sort of also my thing. This one's from Melissa Flores and artist French Carlo Magno. Our protagonist is Bibiana Lopez Yang. She is living in San Francisco, and San Francisco is changing. Local government has seemingly ceded control of public safety to a private tech corporation that acts more like a protection racket than a civil service. So this is purely fictional and not related at all to reality. More and more, the place that Bibiana loves is being overrun in a way that she doesn't recognize. And wherever that tech corporation isn't governing people with an iron fist, there are gangs trying to push back, and she is caught in the middle of that. Bibiana herself is not immune to change. She's an interesting character in that she is a veteran. And so she's dealing with PTSD, dealing with what happens when you have to sort of reacclimate yourself to civilian life. She was also the victim of a mysterious incident that killed her platoon and left her with strange powers and a crippling survivor's guilt. So throughout the series, Bibi will fight against these exterior forces, but she's also fighting to remain herself and fighting to see what place she has in this world, and whether that world wants her and whether she'll allow it not to want her. So I like this story a lot. I love the art. I love anything in San Francisco. Yeah, you can sort of think about this in the same way as the Matrix series and Peripheral, and there's just a lot to love. Moving on from the Massive Verse titles, we have Do a Powerbomb. This is another title that you're going to see the T+ rating on, and again, that's just because, you know, there isn't anything overtly objectionable about it. You will find violence in this series, though. It does center around wrestling, so there is that sort of violence in it. So this comes to us from Daniel Warren Johnson. You might know him from his work on Extremity and Murder Falcon. And if so, you'll know that the sort of fiction that he hews towards is a kinetic powerhouse, heart-pumping action that also has just awe-inspiring and really heart-wrenching drama. So Do a Powerbomb is no different than that. It is really squarely in his oeuvre. Our hero is Lona Steelrose. She is a young woman who was literally born to be a pro wrestler. It is in her blood. Her whole family is in the industry. Her mother was the most famous wrestler there ever was. Unfortunately, her mother perished in the ring due to a move gone wrong. And since then, even though it's all that she loves, she has not been allowed to wrestle. Her family will not allow anyone to train her, so she has to train in secret. And that is when she is approached by a wrestling obsessed necromancer. And I want you to stay with me here. I just need you to like play in this space with me. She is offered a deal that she cannot refuse. She can agree to take part in the most dangerous tournament of all time, and the necromancer will bring her mother back. It is a deal that she has to take. There's no other choice, the chance to get your mother back. This is a very energetic and emotionally complex story. You can liken it to the hero's journey with the addition of pro wrestling and supernatural elements. And it's great. It's energetic. It is really touching. And I don't think that there's a lot out there like this. Moving on, we have Love Everlasting. A lot of you, if you're into comics, have probably heard of Tom King. He is a powerhouse in the comics industry, and he's teaming up with Elsa Charretier on this volume. It is the thrill of romance, the thrill of a good pulp novel, and the thrill of a Twilight Zone episode that just never ends. There is existentialism and mystery, and it just like traps the audience in a inescapable web of increasing horror. Our protagonist, Joan, all she wants is to fall in love. But when Cupid finally blesses her, she dies. And then she falls in love again, and then she dies again, and then she falls in love again, and then she dies again. And there's no way for her to escape this endless time loop of trysts where she meets a man, falls in love, and then topples straight out of her own universe and into another. Increasingly, like the best Black Mirror episode out there, Joan will begin to quest not for love, but for the sweet release of death or whatever will bring her out of this terrible tangle of romance after romance after romance. I think that this title is unique in its art style. You'll notice that it has a very European feel to it. That is Elsa to a T, and it really also fits the story. It makes you feel like you're in a pulp novel. This title is for readers 18 and up. I can see a lot of older teens probably enjoying it as well. If you like the Sandman universe, or you were a fan of Palm Springs, for example, this is really going to resonate with you. Our next title is Public Domain from the funniest man in funny books, Chip Zdarsky. This one is great because even though it's a superhero title and it's a humor title, it's also a family drama. It is about a protagonist who is the son of a comic book legend. His father helped to create the most memorable and well-known comic book character out there, making its publisher millions upon millions of dollars. It's like a pop culture juggernaut. Unfortunately, like many creators of his era, Sid Dallas has not made a dime off of this character, nor will he ever. That is until his son decides to take matters into his own hands and try to get recognition and monetary compensation back to his dad. And that is just the beginning of this title. I really love this because of, again, how it blends comedy and drama and an insider look at the comics industry. This is rated M for readers 18 and up. I think this is squarely in the adult field, not because there's anything that a teenager shouldn't see, but because I don't know that your average teenager has the life experience to sort of recognize and have a lot of these themes resonate with them. Apologies, my allergies are out of control. Again, this would be like assigning Bartleby the Scrivener to a high school student who's never had a job is what I would like it to. But yeah, I just love this. I love Chip's foray into drama because he still has humor, but he can still really touch you. And so I think that that's fantastic. Our final title is Dark Ride Volume 1. This is for every Disney adult out there whose favorite ride is the Haunted Mansion. It is another title that is more than it seems on its face. It starts out about Devil's Land, the most popular theme park in the nation. It's a legacy business that is no longer doing very well. It used to be huge, but people have moved on. There are streaming services and TikTok, and nobody wants to go to the park anymore. The park's founder has 2 children who are eager to take over the mantle of running the place. Unfortunately, their father is kind of a control freak. He does not want to listen to any of their ideas. He won't recognize their creative contributions, but he will keep asking for those contributions, which is sort of an interesting dynamic that I think a lot of us will recognize. While we explore what it's like to be the children of a famous theme park mogul, we also have a series of mysterious disappearances and murders, possibly happening in the park, which is possibly a gateway to literal hell, This is another title that blends humor with horror and family drama. It is a little bit grisly, so you'll need to know that that's in there before you get on the ride, so to speak. But I think that it is absolutely a thrilling and hilarious title, and I love it so much. That is going to be it for the titles that I'm presenting, but I did want to make sure to let you all know that we're very aware of the fact that challenges are really taking over the library world right now, and we're trying to do as much as we can to help push back on that. So if you work at a library and any of our titles have been challenged or are being subject to potential banning, please email us at the contact information on this slide. We are more than happy to help you in any way that we can.
Awesome. Thanks, Chloe. So while Ari, you can take over, one of the things that jumped out, like anytime you can connect me to New Orleans, that's like an easy recommendation. So I wrote Rogue Sundown. But a friend of mine actually recommended Do a Powerbomb because he's a huge wrestling fan. So I like that cross-media reference point to pull people into comics. That's an excellent way to make that connection. All right, Ari, Silver Sprocket.
All right. Yeah. Hi, I'm Ari Yarwood. I'm the managing editor at Silver Sprocket. Please bear with me because everybody else on the team is recovering from the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. I'm not normally our presentation person. But I will do my best. We are a small indie publisher based in San Francisco that focuses on socially conscious comics and graphic novels. I would say about 98% of our comics are for general audience or adults. And so I'm very excited to talk about comics for older readers. I'm going to talk about our top 3 bestsellers, and then I'm just going to briefly talk about just some categories of comics that we publish after that. Our first comic is, am I doing it? Yes, okay. Catboy by Benji Nate. This is our #1 best-selling graphic novel, which answers the age-old question of what if your cat was also a person? Which sounds like everyone who has a cat kind of wants to hang out with them as a person and eat pizza. So the main character, Olive, is an aspiring artist in her early 20s, very much in that vein of like, what am I doing with my life? How do I find my place in the world? And she wishes on a magic shooting star, and her cat Henry becomes a person who is also still a cat. And so he has to balance, being a person, also being a cat, wanting to sit in boxes and like eat, fish, but also he has to get a job. And so it's very funny. It's very sweet. The art is really colorful and approachable. The chapters are all broken up with super cute little fashion pinups of both of them. Henry steals Olive's clothes and sometimes looks better in them than she does. And it's just a very heartwarming read, which is why I think it's so popular, aside from the cat angle, because everybody loves cats. I think this would be a really nice comic to recommend just to anyone who was looking to get into comics, as well as people in their late teens, early 20s, trying to find their place in the world, particularly readers who grew up with things like Adventure Time or Steven Universe. I think you're going to find a lot to recognize in this book. Other comics by Benji Nate are Hellphone, which is a play on cell phone, which is a murder mystery starring two best friends who have to try and solve a decades-old murder using clues that are given to them by a mysterious person on the other end of a flip phone. Benji Nate also co-edits Good Boy Magazine with Michael Sweater, which is a comics anthology magazine that collects short comics from a bunch of different artists, along with interviews and criticism. And so that's also a really cool place to just get to read a lot of different fun comics. And then Lorna, which is a super short, cute horror comedy about a girl who tries to make friends, but is like a little too intimidating and a little too knife happy to do that very well. And so all of Benji's books are definitely appropriate for adults, and I think older teens would also enjoy them. Our next book is Your Black Friend and Other Strangers by Ben Passmore. This is probably one of our most well-known books and our most critically acclaimed books. It's a collection of comics, so it's also a one-person anthology, which discusses race, gentrification, the prison industrial complex, American history, blended with comics about just like punk antics, funny personal stories, New Orleans history, and just esoteric musings. The title comic, so Your Black Friend and Other Strangers, was nominated for an Eisner. It won an Ignatz Award. And we also did a animated short of it, which a lot of people really liked and got shared around the internet, and is a cool way to introduce the book. I would definitely say this is for adults, but I think older teens who don't mind a little bit of risque humor would also enjoy it. Ben's art is super colorful and stylized, and the book is really grounded in Ben's politics, his humor, and his own experience. It's a very funny book, and I think this makes it a really approachable book and enjoyable to read, even though some of the material is pretty heavy and serious. I would definitely recommend this for reading lists and really anybody who's looking for a more radical or personal take on race and politics and privilege and how that sits in American culture. We also published Sports is Hell by Ben Passmore, which is also won an Eisner Award. That was originally published by Koyama Press, and we took over publishing rights on that when they couldn't publish it anymore. It's a satirical fiction graphic novel that uses sports and football in particular as a way to discuss political action, riots, violence, capitalism, and race. It's also just like a super fun action book. And then he has also done Dayglow A-Hole, which is 100% just pure artistic punk indulgence, like psychedelic, like near future dystopia. It's very funny and also just like you read it and you're completely transported into Ben's brain. Our third comic that I want to talk about is Magical Beatdown by Jen Woodall. It's also one of our top sellers. It is a super simple premise. It is about a normal girl who transforms into a super powerful magical girl whenever she is harassed or threatened. And then we get to see some super stylized, hyper violent retribution. And so it's very much in line with revenge movies where like the satisfaction comes from a woman just absolutely pulverizing people who objectify her or make her feel unsafe. We have 3 volumes of it. They're volume 1, 2, and 3 are saddle stitched comics, so they'd be good for zine collections. And then we are also available digitally, but we're also planning on having a perfect bound version of it coming early next year that collects all of them. The art is obviously very manga inspired and is stylized with just the pink and the blue. And so whenever she transitions to her magical girl form, you get that really bright pink. It is pretty violent because that's the whole deal. And so, you know, definitely for adults, but teens who like gore, I think would be totally fine with it. And despite all of the violence that's in it, there's also a really sweet queer romance that's threaded throughout the books. So I would definitely recommend this for, you know, readers of Sailor Moon and other magical girl comics that want something a little bit edgy. It's also a super quick read. And really anyone who's looking for that kind of like satisfying revenge thriller. Jen also has another book with us called Marie and the Worrywart, which is about experiences with OCD and anxiety. And has a really nice list of resources in the back of it for mental health. And that's also a zine and could be good for a zine collection. And then I also just want to talk about a couple categories of comics that we publish. We publish a lot of nonfiction comics that sort of fall into different subcategories. We have a lot of nonfiction anthologies that cover different topics. 2 of the ones that I put on the slide are American Cults, which talks about America's history of cults from the colonial era to today. And it's each different chapter is by a different artist, so you get a really cool selection of different art styles and perspectives. And then Comics for Choice, which just came out in a 2nd edition, which is a collection of comics about abortion, abortion rights, the politics of abortion, as well as personal stories about abortion. And then those are all also done by different artists and writers, including health educators, teaming up with cartoonists. We also do some like DIY and comics resources about making comics. Making comic zines is a sort of all ages, appropriate for adults or for kids, step-by-step version of like, how do I make a zine? How do I make my first comic? And then Stolen Sharpie Revolution gives you a lot of information about how to make zines, but also gives you the history and the culture of zines. We also publish some memoir and personal narratives. Cicatrix is a sort of contemplation about guilt and hypochondria stemming from the like weight of being a young Filipino person whose family has benefited from the Marcos regime. And then Montana Diary is a travelogue by Whit Taylor. Sorry, I lost my place. Talking about her road trip through Montana, balancing just sort of regular road trip humor with the state's complicated history and relationship to the environment and the history of manifest destiny. We also publish health and safety guides, including a self-defense guide for trans women specifically, and an anti-anxiety pocketbook, which has resources and exercises for when you are experiencing anxiety. I also wanted to talk about specifically our queer and trans authors and books. I know we've talked a little bit about challenges and things like that, but our publishing staff is largely queer, including myself, and it's personally important to us to publish and support these stories. And I know that the climate around specifically queer and trans comics is politically loaded and hard, but these stories and perspectives are really important to preserve and make available to the people that need them, as well as, you know, the people who might not know that they would enjoy them. And they're also just very good books. So I wanted to put a spotlight on them. There's also, at least I have found, it's a little harder to find queer and trans books for an adult audience versus middle grade YA. And so since we have a lot of those, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about the ones we have to offer. So the ones on this slide are sort of falling into that literary fiction category. The Sucker is about two exes who end up on a scientific mission together and discover a species of squid that was thought to be extinct, and then tempers flare about what to do about that animal and discovery. Precariat Season is a really beautiful fable, sort of in the style of Michael DeForge, about longing and yearning, and that like late teens, early 20s, trying to figure out what your purpose is, why do you even exist? And then Golden Record is a poetry chapbook written in both English and Spanish that deals with love and the body, and is fully illustrated and is really beautiful. The next slide has experimental and bombastic fiction. These are like the weird ones. In a very good way, perfect for people who really like, you know, Adult Swim, BoJack Horseman, that kind of thing. Fun Girl is a comedy about a woman who just like keeps trying her best and just keeps just doing a bad job, and making a mess of it. Enlightened Transsexual Comics is a collection of satirical comics about modern trans life. They're also very funny. And Pinky and Pepper Forever is a horror comedy where two girls get stuck in hell and have to figure out their feelings. And then our last slide is genre romance. So these are queer romances that are, you know, set with a specific genre. Be Kind, My Neighbor is one of our bestsellers from last year. It's a folk horror that also has a murder mystery that's also a romance between two trans men. Sad Girl Space Lizard is a science fiction graphic novel with set in obviously space on a spaceship. They get stranded, and oh no, there's only us in the middle of space. And you know, it's a romance between two women who also happen to be lizards. And LSBN is a science fiction sort of mech graphic novel with a romance between two trans women. And that's all the books I wanted to talk about today. You can contact either me or our publisher if you have any questions at all or would like any resources. All of our books are obviously available digitally and then also through SEB, Ingram, and Baker and Taylor. Thank you so much.
Yes, hello. I'm Morgana Santilli. Again, I'm the sales and marketing coordinator at Yen Press. We publish manga, and I know we were kind of talking about this before we started, but manga has a reputation for being too adult sometimes. And one of the nice things about this webinar in particular is that I get to talk about a few of my favorite things that we publish that don't push into that like completely inappropriate kind of realm. So I'm excited to talk about these. First up, I want to mention A Bride's Story. I've loved A Bride's Story for many, many years, long before I ever even thought about working at Yen. This is a story about a woman named Amir who she's in her early 20s, and she's kind of old to be getting married, but she is married off to a boy from another tribe, and he's 12. So there's this age gap thing that makes it a little bit complicated for our modern sensibilities, but it's actually a very sweet story about how they learn to care about each other and grow together in this culture that she's taken away from her tribe and is learning to kind of immerse herself in her husband's tribe. This is not a plot driven series. It's long. We're up to 13 volumes now, and 14 is coming out, I think, in September. It is very much a just kind of gorgeous immersion in the 19th century, like Silk Road. Kaoru Mori is an incredible artist. I grabbed a couple scenes here so you could see both her still work and some of her action stuff. And it's just, this book is really, I think partially it's 16 plus because it's kind of slow and contemplative and really about the history of this incredible part of the world. And again, it's the Silk Road. It stretches through, Asia and the Middle East, and really looks closely at the history and culture at this point in time. It's just a fascinating series. It kind of, Amir and her husband are the kind of main point, but there is also, we also follow other characters as they travel throughout this area. I will say it's pretty inoffensive. In later volumes, there is some nudity. I would call it non-sexual nudity. That does not mean it's not sexy. It's not sensual, but I don't think it's inappropriate for a mature teenager, older teenager who, maybe is really into art, for example. Again, Kaoru Mori, as you can see, is just an incredible artist. For that alone, I would recommend reading A Bride's Story. Next up, we've got My Broken Mariko. This is a standalone book, just one volume. I would definitely recommend this for adults or anyone who has experienced grief. This is about a woman named Tomoyo who finds out that her friend Mariko has committed suicide. So it's very heavy material. And her friend Mariko dealt with years and years of abuse at the hands of her father, and then abuse at the hands of a romantic partner. And Tomoyo stood by her through it all, and again finds out her friend has died and decides to liberate her ashes from her parents and take it on one last trip. And unfortunately, you can't see too well how the art looks here, but it's just, there's a lot of movement in Waka Hirako's artwork, a lot of emotion in the expressions that she makes on her characters' faces. And despite the fact that it is a very dark and emotional book in a lot of ways, it is also very funny. There's a lot of humor. And I think, as someone who has lost loved ones, I find that it mirrors grief really well. Grief is not one linear thing. There's a lot of ups and downs. And I think Waka Hiroko does a really good job of conveying that to the reader. And again, that's why I think that really adults will get more out of it, people who have had a little bit more life experience. That doesn't mean that it's not okay for younger audiences, but there is that big warning about subject matter. There's some smoking and some drinking also, which I know some people find objectionable, but it's a very touching standalone manga. Ari was talking about how there's not enough queer books for adults, and I agree. And that's why this title, and I believe the next one, really excite me, that we published these. So a lot of the queer fiction that is available in manga in English is about teenagers, teenage romances, especially the lesbian romances tend to be like, we're teenagers, we'll do this young and dumb thing for high school, and then, you know, what a great fling. She Loves to Cook and She Loves to Eat is about Nomoto, who loves cooking. She loves making elaborate meals, but she can never eat them all herself. She's not, you know, she's not as into eating as she is into the art of cooking a meal. And she meets her neighbor Kasuga, and Kasuga is, as you can see, a very tall woman, very large woman, and she loves eating. She not in a like, I don't want it to seem that this is in any way like fat shaming or anything like that. She's just somebody who, she uses a lot of energy in her job, and she just loves to like load up on delicious food. So they kind of form this awkward friendship where Nomoto is like, I cook too much. Would you like to eat some of the food I've made? And they just gradually get closer and closer, and they start cooking together. And this kind of leads to a in the first volume, you kind of get the implication that there might be something more to this than friendship. And even if there's not, it's a very wholesome friendship too, and a very wholesome potential romance. I really love it. I just love that there's a part where Nomoto is laid out because she gets her period and she's just so exhausted, and Kasuga's like, hey, I haven't heard from you all day. Are you okay? And she explains, oh, I'm not feeling great. And Kasuga's just like, oh, sure, I'll go get you some supplies. I'll go like help you out. And it's just such a an honest experience that people have between each other, such a like, hey, I care about you, I'm going to go do this thing for you. So I love how kind of grounded their relationship is. And another queer title we have, I Want to Be a Wall, is a story about an asexual woman who marries a gay man. They are both obviously hiding their sexualities from their friends and family. And it sounds a little sad, but the nice thing about it is you kind of get to see them explore a marriage and a partnership from a different perspective. It's not about the romance. It's really about learning to be partners and care for each other. And is it, you know, I think an important aspect of marriage that maybe doesn't get talked about as much in fiction because the emphasis is always on the romance. The main female character loves BL, boys love. She loves stories about gay men and her husband is gay. And he knows nothing about the genre of boys love. So he's like learning from her about all these like ridiculous tropes. And she's also kind of cheering for him and his romance with his his non-romance with his childhood friend. He's in love with a childhood friend. So again, it's a really sweet story about how they kind of learn to navigate kind of being a married couple and not outing each other and not, you know, putting stress on their family, which again sounds a little sad, but is a reality that I think is interesting to explore. So really interesting different perspective on queerness and on marriage. And finally, Phantom Tales of the Night is a kind of, this is my favorite kind of story. I don't know if some of you who have been into manga for a long time might remember way back when Tokyopop published a series called Pet Shop of Horrors, and this very much reminds me of that, where you have this beautiful and mysterious person who will exchange goods or services for something intangible. And in this case, we have this mysterious innkeeper who will help you kind of they'll take you in, they'll take you into their inn and help you, and the form of payment they require is your deepest, darkest secret. It's very Twilight Zone, very kind of the like, I don't know, like you get your moral comeuppance, and it's got some really gorgeous, weird artwork. Lots of beautiful people, beautiful characters, and then gruesome scenes. So 16 plus, because it's a little bit more graphic, more in the violence category than anything else, or gore. But a great read, just like dark and spooky. I love things that blend kind of beauty and horror, and I think that's very much a part of comics right now, is like this line between the two. So another favorite of mine. Yen Press in print. So we are distributed directly through Hachette Book Group. You can also get our books through Ingram, Baker and Taylor, and Bookazine. A few of the books I mentioned here come in hardcover. I know that manga can sometimes be challenging because it's all paperback and kind of, I've heard complaints about them falling apart easily. But we do have A Bride's Story is all hardcover, and My Broken Mariko's hardcover, both with dust jackets. But yes, those are the places you can get our stuff. And if you have any questions, or if you are looking for more recommendations, my email address is there, morgana.santilli@yenpress.com. Thanks so much.
There we go. So thank you, the three of you, for those great, really broad mix of genres, art styles. We got comics, we got manga. So we're close to time. We're going to go a couple of minutes over because I want to make sure we get to a few of these questions. You all did a really good job of connecting the dots to either non-comics interests or other media. Ari, I've never felt older on these webinars than you making the reference to adults who grew up with Adventure Time. I'm like, oh my God, that's my kids who are not kids anymore, which makes me so much older. And so that hurt a little bit, but a good reference point. And I was actually kind of interested in Ben's work. So your presentation, that was both like, it hurt a little bit, but also it worked. And Morgana, I'm really glad you spotlighted one standalone. I think with manga, one of the biggest challenges, even for me personally, when I was getting into manga, was like, the where to start joke for superhero comics. It's a different with, well, where to start with manga, but do I want to commit to this 25 volume series? So I'm glad you pulled out a standalone. So one of the questions we got was about how to kind of connect those dots to other interests. You guys did a good job of that. So what I want to focus on is, how do you connect that interest? Like, oh, Guy, you're, New Orleans, your favorite city. Here's an interesting comic. How do you overcome the next obstacle of, but I don't think comics are for me. I'm not into I didn't grow up reading comics. How do you, not that I don't think comics are reading, but just that I've never read a comic. So how do you help someone kind of overcome that obstacle of, oh, there's pictures and word balloons, and what are some recommendations you have for that?
One of the things that I think is the most helpful for adult readers who may not have developed the unique level of textual and visual literacy that you sort of need to engage with a comic fully is to host book clubs at your library and read along with your adults. It can be hard to make a connection between where you're supposed to go, panel to panel to panel, and page to page, and whether to read left to right or right to left, whether to look at the art first or the text first, or how that all blends. And it can really help if you market a book club to your patrons that spotlights a particular genre or interest that includes both non-graphic fiction and graphic fiction. So you want to get them hooked, and then you want to bring them in and say, well, you loved that detective novel, and here's what I have for you to read today. And I'm going to work with you until this becomes second nature.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think one thing to do when trying to get comics out there more is don't treat it any differently from any other book. When you're making a display or when you're making a recommendation, just put the comics, the graphic novels, the manga out there with everything else. If somebody comes up to you and says, I really like horror, what do you recommend? Pick up the latest Stephen King novel, but also maybe grab something else that is a comic without qualifying it. Say, well, don't say like this is a comic, but just it's a recommendation like everything else. Yeah, I think that is a really valuable, like not treating it like taboo, I guess, or other. Reading is reading, right? Yeah.
I definitely agree with everything that you both said. I've also found just like at conventions, when I'm trying to hand sell titles to people, and they're maybe a new comics reader, they might not necessarily be used to thinking of books as a visual art form. And so a lot of people, make an instant decision on whether or not they're going to read a comic based off the art. But it's hard for them to pinpoint what kind of art they like. And so for that, I like to use like TV shows and movies because those are visual art forms that have a particular aesthetic. And so like if they like A24 movies, I can sort of point them toward more of the indie style. Things like that can be a little bit helpful just with individual recommendations.
Cool. So Ari, I'm going to direct this to you because I know you guys specifically have relevant titles, but Chloe and Morgana, if anything comes up on your end, jump in as well. So do you have any nonfiction recommendations that aren't memoirs or biographies?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I covered a lot of the ones that we publish in my slides, but I do think there are actually quite a few books or graphic novels that aren't memoir biographies. I think those are the most popular ones, or the ones that end up on the most lists. But there's definitely a lot of instructional comics. Comics are a really great way to convey like educational information in a way that's a little bit more digestible. I know that I actually worked on the series, but Oni Press has a quick and easy guide series that covers things like they them pronouns, consent, disability, sexuality, and those are really cool titles. And there's also a lot of like mental health comics, things that deal with mental health. So yeah, I definitely would recommend a lot of those.
Cool. And Morgana, I know manga, like explainer manga, is a whole category.
Yeah, that definitely exists out there. We don't, as far as yen goes, we have nonfiction manga. A lot of them tend to be kind of memoir, but they are also like very specific to it, like a topic. So it's not like here's a story about my life. It's like, here's a story about a specific aspect. Like we have one called I Don't Know How to Give Birth, which is all about the author's experience being pregnant and giving birth, and also gives context, like cultural context to giving birth in Japan, which is really interesting. So it does have that memoir aspect to it, but there is also kind of an educational side to it. But there are, I know that there are manga guides to, there's a whole set we used to carry at the comic shop of like manga guide to physics and math and all of those. I don't know, I can't remember the name of the publisher off the top of my head, but those definitely exist out in the world. But I think the memoirs and the autobio stuff in the realm of manga has become very popular lately. I think because it's very popular in comics in general, and that's kind of what manga publishers are willing to try. to bring over into English. Yeah, and also, several years back, Seven Seas came out with My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, which is an excellent comic, an excellent manga, um, autobio that I think kind of kicked off a craze for a lot of autobio stuff in manga.
All right. Do you have something, Chloe?
I would say that the bulk of our nonfiction is going to be memoir based, or autobio or biography. But what we do have is a lot of nonfiction and educational back matter that we add to our titles now. A lot of our creators are really invested in making sure that their titles, when it seems appropriate, have like curriculum connections, for example, and a lot of our titles are being used in on college campuses and in their curricula. So increasingly, we will have scholars and other thinkers in a particular genre or field come in and write additional back matter that is nonfiction in nature. I would point to The Good Asian as being one of the best examples that we have currently, because it deals so much in, even though it's a fictional story, it deals so much in the real historical San Francisco Chinatown, the Chinese Exclusion Act. It deals with real people in San Francisco and in Hawaii, in the AAPI community at that time. So you have just a whole wealth of back matter material that deals with the real history of that at the end of the book.
Cool. All right. So last few questions. First is, and then we'll go in reverse order. Chloe, recommendations for resources for librarians who want to know more about comics in general, but in particular comics to help support older readers.
You can use our library resources newsletter, which comes out once a month. Sorry, my cat's trying to climb my leg. I've been talking for too long without talking to her, and now she's upset. We have a monthly library resources newsletter that has reading and discussion guides, spotlights libraries and their programming, and spotlights upcoming events. I highly recommend you sign up for that. You can also reach out directly to us. You can email me at my personal email, which was listed in the slide. You can email any questions or support requests to info@imagecomics.com. We make bespoke materials for people, such as reading lists. So if you have readers' recommendation and you need assistance with that, we're also more than willing to craft sort of response guides that we're working on for challenges and bans. So if something has been challenged at your library, contact us and we will help work with you to get professional awards lists, reviews lists, to look at your mission statement and your community and see how the title is serving that statement and serving the needs of your community, so you can take that document back and use it as a support system to respond to the challenge or ban. So yeah, just reach out directly to us. We're always here. We want to help.
Awesome. All right.
We're definitely a smaller publisher, so we have a little bit less resources than Image does, but we're more than happy to work with any libraries on a personal level to like help build adult collections and things like that. But just in a more general sense, I think something that maybe doesn't occur to people is comic conventions usually have like really good resources in terms of professional development and panels. And a lot of them are online now as well. So even if you don't have a local comic convention to go to, you'll be able to look up like the panels online. I know that the TCAF, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, has all of their panels from the last like 3 years on their YouTube. So that can be a really like easy way to learn a little bit more about the comics industry and what comics are sort of being talked about.
Cool. Mariana?
Yeah, so we sporadically have a librarian newsletter. It's something that we're gonna try and get up and going again in the near future. But in general, yes, please reach out to me. Certainly, my inbox is crazy, but I will try to get back to you. I also, we've been doing a lot of these webinars. I've done quite a few through Library Journal, School Library Journal, through Booklist. Chloe's been on a lot of them. So, I definitely think those are great resources, and I'm sure a lot of you know about those already, since you're here. But I found this really interesting, and I find out a lot about what's coming up in comics from being on those. Um, yeah, those are like I think the main things that, to find out more about Yen for sure. Of course, we have our social media and everything like that, but following 10 million publishers is a lot of work. I know because I've done it. Yeah, and I actually find out a lot of really interesting information from Publishers Weekly, and also ICV2 is a really great resource for comics. It's technically for comics retailers, but I think in general, hearing about kind of what's selling really well, or what's hot right now, is always helpful.
Yeah, definitely PWICV2 as far as professional resources. And I'd also recommend the ALA's graphic novels and comics roundtable, GNCRT. I should know that since my colleague is currently the president, Moni. All right, so last thing before we wrap up, I asked each of you to have a recommendation of a title not from your own publisher that you would recommend to older readers. And I'll give you a second. We'll go in reverse order, starting with Magana, but I'm going to do mine. Upgrade Soul from originally Lionforge, now Oni. That I've read that for the first time about a year and a half ago. Blew me away. Loved it. Great sci-fi. It's about clones, but there's so much in this current AI nonsense that's going on that I think makes it relevant again. But loved it. One of the freshest reads I've read in years. Would highly recommend it to basically 16 and up, even though certain communities maybe keep it at 18. All right, Morgana.
Yeah, so this is a tough question to ask somebody who loves to read. But I was looking through what's on Comics Pass, and Kodansha publishes Parasite, which is one of I actually didn't read it until adulthood, but when I was a kid, Parasite was in Mix magazine next to Sailor Moon and Magic Knight Rayearth, and it was such a cognitive dissonance kind of experience. The Parasite is a science fiction body horror comic series. I believe it's 9 double volumes, and Kodansha is actually reprinting them now, I think in full color hardcovers. And it's a great story about these extraterrestrial parasites who come to Earth and take over organic matter. They take over humans and animals, and they're basically, it's survival of the fittest. They're trying to kill and eat everything, but and reproduce and kind of take over. But our protagonist somehow manages not to get completely taken over. The parasite takes over his hand, and they kind of form a symbiotic relationship. And the parasite has no moral sense or anything like that, and he's kind of what makes you human? What makes you a monster? Are the humans monsters? Because that's always fun. There's an environmental aspect to it, which I'm a sucker for. And I also read it for the first time when I was pregnant with my firstborn, which was a really interesting experience to think about parasites while you're carrying someone. So really, and there is a pregnancy actually in the story itself. Really interesting, really took me by surprise. Really good art. Definitely 16 plus is I think what's rated. Super violent, super duper bloody. So keep that in mind if you're gonna put it in your collection. But I think it's a really, really wonderful comic.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, this was hard to pick one. But yeah, I was thinking about books that I like to recommend to people, especially people who may not have read comics very much before. And I feel like Super Late Bloomer by Julia Kay is a really approachable and accessible comic just in general. It's daily diary comics, and they're all 3 panels. So it's very easy to understand where your eye is supposed to go. It's very quick to read. But the book is about her like early days in transition. And so it's about, you know, all of like her experiences and feelings transitioning. And it's just like a very sweet book, and I think a really relatable book, whether or not you relate to that particular experience. Yeah, and it's available through Library Pass. And yeah, won a bunch of awards.
That one's,
And,
we don't have that available, but I'm
oh, you
putting it
don't?
on our
Oh.
list to look for. Yeah, that was her website.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I think that's just a really fun book, and an enjoyable read, no matter who you are.
Cool. All right, and Chloe, bring it home.
My recommendation is going to be for Natsume's Book of Friends. It is technically, I think, marketed towards teen readers, but if you are a fan of Japanese folklore and sort of supernatural mixed with slice of life comics, I really can't recommend it enough. I've been reading it for so many years now, and it never fails to delight and warm my heart. It has the central premise is that this young man who's been passed from family to family and really has not had an easy life, who has no living parents of his own, and ends up getting finally adopted by an incredibly distant relative, and has to learn to trust, to accept love, to believe in himself. And also, he has a book of names, all belonging to supernatural entities, and he has to give the names back in order to restore their power and autonomy. So he comes into contact with a lot of yokai, monsters, exorcists, demon hunters, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's just a book about like what we owe each other, you know, how we can be kind to each other regardless of our differences, and what we can do to understand people who may seem completely alien to us at first. I don't know. It's just very touching. It's always sweet.
Awesome. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's session. I want to thank Chloe, Ari, Morgana, Image, Silver Sprocket, Yen Press for joining us today. Thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. Check out these great comics on Comics Plus if you are currently a Comics Plus customer. And if not, check us out at comicsplusapp.com. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.